Hi, I'm Bill Koenecke. I'm a retired professor from Murray State University. I retired in 2012. Since then, I have been writing books, and I'm now an author of one book, and I'm writing a second book. I've had 45 years of experience in education, starting out as a high school chemistry teacher, all the way up through a university professor at 3 universities. I think I've done every job in education except be a guidance counselor and a bus driver. In one of my positions during the summer, I was a summer custodian. So my talk today is about flashcards. I call those things note cards. I've used them for 50 years and they've been very successful. I'll tell you a quick story. I started using them in college when I was taking a class at Murray State, and the teacher came in and said, this is an easy class. We're going to study animals, and you're going to have a test at the end of the semester, and you're going to have 100 animals, and you have to give their genus and species, and you have to spell them correctly. I thought, well, that's pretty easy. This professor had a reputation of being a hard professor. I'd had him before. So somebody said, there's more to the story, and he said, oh yeah, he said, I forgot to tell you, we're going to study 4,000 animals, and I haven't decided which 100 I'm going to pick, so you can learn all 4,000 of them. Well, that just blew our mind. But he said a good way to do this is each day study so many and use note cards and put the common name on one side and the genus and species on the other side, and do 10, 15 a day, and at the end of the semester, you'll know all of them. And he was right. It took several hours, but I did really well on that final exam. So, why do you use flashcards? Or I call them note cards. I believe I use them because I know they work. One size doesn't fit all, and some people don't like to use note cards, and that's fine. There are many other ways to study. Note cards are useful because it gets the information, like the term on one side, the definition on the other side. And you flip them just like you would a deck of cards. The ones you know, you put in a pile. The ones you don't know, you put in another pile. And then when you go through the list, the ones you don't know, you keep going through that list, dwindling it down until just a few, and that takes several hours, but it works. Now, they're inexpensive, they're portable, they're efficient, they're versatile, and it always helped me do well on tests, and I believe it would you as well. Why do they work? Well, they're an effective way to learn new information, and it requires active learning. You have to participate in the note card experience and actually say the words out loud if you can, and then before you flip the card over, you put in your mind what you think the answer is, and then you flip the card over to see if you're correct. And I'm going to emphasize this later, but the terms and definitions that you put on the note card back, you need to put those in your own words. You do not need to use a textbook definition, nor a definition on the internet, but put the definitions in your own words. Why? Because you're more apt to remember the terms and definitions using your own words than you are to memorize a lot of things you don't maybe understand completely. Okay, why do they work? Well, passive learning. Every card tests your memory, and it forces students to reflect and think about what their thought differences are, their processes are. And they also are practicing confidence, repetition, and spaced repetition. You do some, you wait some time, a day or two, you do more, and you keep adding to your deck of cards, and each day you're getting reinforced by repetition. And another thing that I found, why study the note cards you already know? If you know them, you're kind of wasting your time. You will remember those, so just study the note cards that you don't know. And it tells you what you already know so far. It allows you to repeat information over and over again, and repetition is one of the best ways to study. Okay, how do you make flashcards? Well, you can do it electronically, and I'll tell you 3 different electronic versions that I recommend. But I believe in doing it the old-fashioned way. I get a 5x8 index card that has printing or has lines on one side and blank on the other side. I put the term on the ruled side, and I put the definition in my own words on the opposite side. I put them in a 5x8 plastic box, and I label the box for the topic. Each card is labeled with an index marker that I tape on or I put on with like an index tab, and I have them all in alphabetic order so I can get to them immediately if I want to. Now, when I go through the cards, I mix them up and shuffle them up so they're not in the same order particularly every time. Okay, what's another reason? Well, it's important to use your own words. I emphasize that because you also learn when you rewrite terms and definitions in your own words. That's another technique to learn, is to rewrite terms. It sticks in your memory better. Not only do you hear it, but you actually physically write the definition. How long and how often do I study for tests? Well, I only study about 30 minutes at a time and take a 5-minute break in between. Because research tells us that if you study for 30 minutes, you tend to remember the first thing you studied and the last thing you studied. If you study for 6 hours, which I don't recommend, you still remember the first thing and the last thing you learned. And now you remember 2 things, but you spent 6 hours doing it. You can spend 30 minutes, do the same thing, repeat it several times. Now you got 10, 15 things that you know well. Okay, don't study over 3 or 4 hours a day or a session because you get fatigued and you don't do well. So study in 30-minute periods. Do not study over 3 or 4 hours in a row. Take a break. Okay? A really, really good thing to do is, if you can, either find copies of old tests, create your own self-tests, or look on the internet, or ask the teacher if they have any sample tests, and see if you can look at the old tests, because the literature says that most of the time the test changes the topics, but the information stays the same. They just write it in different forms so you don't cheat, but the information doesn't change. So if you know what the previous tests were like and what topics they covered, you study those topics. It's kind of common sense. Okay, also you need to be positive. You've prepared, you need to think positive and get a good night's rest. Don't do anything the day before the test. Start a week before the test and do something every day. Now, after you take the test, you want to have the debriefing with yourself. What went well? What did you study that was on the test? What was on the test that you either didn't study very well or you forgot to study? I suggest you ask other fellow students who did well on the test how they prepared. And finally, I would suggest you talk to your teacher, make an appointment, go in and see him and her and say, gee, I didn't do as well on the test as I should have, but where could I improve and how did I mess up? And believe it or not, teachers love to have you come in and talk with them. Now, during my 40-some years of education, I didn't teach the whole time. I was in administration. But during the years I taught, very seldom did students take advantage of that. I had posted office hours, but they didn't tell me, they didn't call me, they didn't ask me, and I would have been glad to have given them extra help free, because that's what office hours are for. So take advantage of that. And teachers want you to do well. After all, if you do poorly, it's a bad reflection on them. So, give you a couple of examples of some electronic versions. The first one I have used is called Cram, and it's cram.com. And it's an easy way to make flashcards, and it's easy to do, and it also automatically reshuffles the cards that you miss, which is great. You don't have to physically reshuffle them. Another one that I haven't used is called Quizlet, Quizlet.com. Same principle, and this one's free as well. I think they have a paid version that's a little bit more expensive, a pro version, but the free version is adequate and does fine. And the last one that I'd recommend is flashcardmachine.com. It's also a simple web-based program. So in summary, one size does not fit all. What works for one person may or may not work for another person. 2, if what you're doing now is working and you're doing well, why change? I mean, it's kind of like throwing a baby out with a bathwash. If you're doing well and your system works, keep doing it. If you're not doing well or you think you need some help, I would recommend highly that you read my chapter in the book, which is going to be called Advice from Experts. It's a cross-section of teachers, authors, students, attorneys, medical doctors, dentists, a CPA, and some others. And they were asked to submit 1 or 2 tips or suggestions that they really used when they were in school, practical tips that actually worked. And they done this, and it's in this chapter, and you can read through there and see what worked for these people, and maybe you could copy that or adapt that to your situation. Third thing is, don't study things you already know. If you don't know them, you need to study them. But if you know them, you're wasting time, and you can save a lot of time by just studying things you don't know. Study for 30 minutes, followed by a 5-minute break, and don't study for 3 or 4 hours. Only study for 3 or 4 hours. Don't study for 6, 7, 8 hours, and do not pull all-night cram sessions. They may work in the short-term run, but in the long run, they do not work. So as I close this, I want to give you my email address. It's notecardrings@gmail.com, NOTECARDRINGS. And this book that I have written is coming out in January, February, March, somewhere in that area, and it'll be on sale. There will be a ebook copy of it that'll run somewhere around $2. The book will retail for about $14.95, and there'll be a bunch of other things in the book besides advice from experts. So I'm going to end with this. I want to tell you about a quote that I've used for many, many years, and it says this: Adversity causes some people to break, while others break records. So I'm challenging you to not let adversity break you, but I'm challenging you to break records. Thank you.